As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, as wonderful an attorney as I am, and as good as Stormy is at whatever it is he does, please do note that anything said in our podcasts are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, Stormy Andrews, founder of Yokel Local Marketing, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Finances, the Other F Word. And today we are starting our part 1 series. I don't really know what I'm going to call it yet. So Zoe texted me last week and she said, hey Mel, we should do an episode on defunding the police. And that's kind of what I was thinking of doing also. But to be honest with you, I didn't really know how much it was going to entail. And I don't know, I was just a little leery of it. But when she said it, I'm like, yeah, we really do need to do that. So I think that the phrase defunding the police is not a good phrasing because it insinuates disbanding the police, which is not what defunding the police is. So this is going to be a couple part series. I don't know how much yet. And today we're just going to talk a little bit about the history of how the police force was actually formed. And then we're going to touch on just real quickly about how much the police department takes of certain cities' budgets, and just to do some brief stuff like that. And then we're going to come back in the other series and we're going to cover other topics of the thing. So first of all, let me say that as we go through this, we're going to be talking pros and cons of defunding the police. Don't give me any fucking bullshit. Okay. Don't sit there and take a snippet. I know that in a couple years, some asshole is going to come back to this podcast and take little snippets out and try to say that we're for or against something. And that is not the case. We don't have anything but respect for law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a debate that is raging, and depending on if you're talking to a severely left-wing person, they might think that defunding the police is actually disbanding the police. And then there's the more moderate people, which is the people that are on this podcast, that understand that defunding the police does not mean a disbandment of the police. So before I get started on the history of the police, do you guys have anything you want to throw in there?
So you gave us the left, you gave us the moderate. What does the far right think defunding the police means?
You know what? I haven't gotten that far yet.
Oh, I can tell you.
Okay. Well, why do you ask me questions you already know the answers to then?
Because I want to see what your answer is going to be.
Okay. What? So tell me.
They're going to come in and kill you and take all your guns and eat your children.
Oh,
but I love babies, me.
I was going to say I don't have any children, so that part doesn't sound too bad. Okay, eat my babies. I'm not concerned about that.
Okay, now eat your babies. Take your guns.
Okay, I have one.
Yep, it's gone, and they're going to come into the suburbs and kill you.
Oh,
wait, both of you are white ladies. Yeah.
What does that mean?
Especially the white ladies.
Especially the Karens.
The Karens.
The Karens in
I'm really frustrated. They're gonna eat my 6 foot tall children. They're gonna steal the guns that I don't have, and I'm white, and my middle name sounds a bit like Karen, so I'm the first to go.
You're
out.
I know you're the first to go because I'm going to give them directions and your address so that they can get to you first. So that way
I know a bit of the both my children are black belts in Taekwondo. Not that they can do shit, but that I'm a bit smooth with the old, arms and legs.
She's still
not the right one, not the left one either. And my shoulder's a bit dicky, but I'm a bit vicious with the tongue. I'll give them a right telling off if they start on me.
In a British accent.
Oh, yeah, Karens are good at that.
Yeah. You know it. Yeah.
See,
take that mask off, get off my land. I'll be good at all of that.
Get off my lawn. Zoe is so froggy from the John Lewis interview where she was like all turned on and excited.
I'm actually a little bit on edge after almost being murdered by a green screen, to be honest, and you both witnessed that. So
yeah, it lunged at you. Okay.
So there we go. The left is, oh, wait. The left is no cops. Wait, the extreme left's like no cops. The far right, is that's their belief, the belief system.
The far left is disbanding. So
disbanding, no cops.
Right.
Yeah, like, well, the community in place of cops. So not that, we'll talk about it. Not that, yeah, no cops, but pretty much that they're more community.
And then everyone lives kumbaya.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so there's kumbaya. Far right, everyone gets murdered. In the middle,
there's
which
people
is where we're at, is there something in between?
Yeah, and people coming
between kumbaya and everyone getting murdered. Got it.
Right. Okay, so let's talk.
I think the calling it defunding the police, as you've said,
it's a bad marketing name. Yeah, bad marketing message.
It's a bad phraseology, if that's the bad terminology.
Yeah.
Isn't it more like a budget haircut?
Kind of. It's reappropriation of some funds.
Yeah.
But reappropriation, that's like a big word.
If
I went to my 3-year-old granddaughter and said, hey, we're going to reappropriate your veggies. Yeah.
She'd probably dig it.
Say, fuck off, Grandpa.
if I got a hold of her, she would. So, okay. So let's start with some general history of of just kind of how the police force came. So the development of the police force in the United States was actually loosely based on England or British policing. And there was this is like way back in the day, there was 2 different versions of the police. There was the watch, and then there was the policing for profit. So there was a watch that was created to look for impending danger. They were made up of volunteers, typically who were draft dodgers, who were drinking on the job, or were actually criminals that were being punished. And their job was to try to stay awake throughout the night and keep everybody alert in case there is any type of impending danger. And of course, you can see that really wasn't very effective. Boston instituted this in 1636, New York in 1658, and Philadelphia in 1700. And then there was policing for profit. And this is where the actual police, the police department, it wasn't really a department then, but they only got paid by the actions they did. So if they, delivered a warrant or served a warrant, they would get paid. They also did land surveying because, police departments, they do that. They also, at the time, verified the accuracy of weights and measures. And they would supervise the night watch people, and they were basically paid, on a fee system. But usually when they were supervising the night watch people, they were also drunk. So there was a lot of drinking going on in this 16
Sounds
and
good
18,
to me.
18.
I like how they followed the British closely then.
Exactly, without that horrible accent. And so
so harsh.
So I love your British accent. So, and hello. Yeah, right. Hello, mate.
I have never met an English person in my life who sounds like that.
We
Hello.
Well,
Sorry, who are you? Where are you from? Hello, my name's Mel.
So in 1830, they became the idea for a centralized police department, and Boston started the first one in 1838. New York followed in 1845, Chicago 1851, New Orleans and Cincinnati in 1853, and etc. And what they did was the police forces started to become organized. They became considered full-time employees. They started to have departments that had permanent rules and procedures. My nose itches. That's a good thing.
I was wondering, it's been distracting. I'm watching you.
I know, it's driving me nuts. And the police departments became accountable to a central government, and they became part of the budget. Now, that's how it was in the North, okay? But in the South, the police department started out completely different. The Southern states' policy for policing, or how the police became, was they started off as slave patrols. And so the first one started in the Carolina colonies in 1704, and their primary objectives were to chase down runaway slaves, to literally provide a form of organized terror to discourage slave revolts. And this is going to kind of tie back in here in a minute when we talk a little bit later. And as the police force, they also had the ability to discipline slaves who violated plantation rules. So what ended up happening was, after the slaves were freed, the police force in the South became a department, an organization that controlled free slaves, or they called new laborers, because of course when they were freed they became laborers, and enforcing the Jim Crow laws. And so we've talked about Jim Crow a couple times, and Stormy went into detail on the Jim Crow, and he talked about how part of the Jim Crow was that they would purposely basically charge blacks with certain crimes so that they were unable to vote. And so literally the police department in the South after the slaves were freed was designed to specifically enforce Jim Crow laws and literally deny, and I'm doing air quotes, nobody can see it, deny freed slaves access to the political system. Okay. So we're seeing North and South, as always, coming from two different sides of the same coin. And then, so police forces in the U.S. Started becoming urbanized. So if you think back to our series of The Men Who Built America, which if you haven't seen or you haven't listened to, you really need to listen to it, because a lot of the stuff we're going to start talking about how the police departments have been in bed with local politicians for a very, very long time actually comes from the roots of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and not necessarily the Fords, because he was actually a good guy, the Vanderbilts and that kind of stuff. And so as we see that everything starts to become urbanized, as we see what is it? The mechanical revolution, what am I saying?
Industrial.
Yes, thank you. The Industrial Revolution starts kicking off. What we do is we start seeing a whole bunch of people move to the cities around these different plants. We see crime goes up. We see mob violence start to kind of rear its head, prostitution, and Zoe and I's favorite, public drunkenness. So
I like the prostitution.
Yeah.
Between us, we've got it all covered, I think.
Yeah,
we got it.
Yeah, there's a little bit for column A and a little bit for column B. It's either way, it's a good time, right?
Right.
Yeah, this is, oh my God, I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to listen to this and be highly offended. So
let's hope so.
So then basically they started to emerge as a response to general disorder. Okay. And then, but the deal is that what constituted disorder in areas was really dependent on the area and who was the one that was defining it. And so what we saw is that we saw in the 19th century, as we see the Men Who Built America, we see all of those people, the magnates we just talked about, start coming up. The police force was designed to protect the interests of the mercantile, and they used the taxes and the political influence to be able to start developing the bureaucracy policies within the institutions. And so again, we have these very, very, very rich men who are hands and away. Like, you think there's a spread between the 1% and the 99% now. Fucking back in the day, in that time, it was so much worse. And literally there was no embarrassment about the police department basically being at the bidding of these big magnates. And so what we started seeing is that these magnates, like I said, the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, they start trying to look at a way to kind of control the socially. And so what they start doing is, when they're trying to control a certain social type of demographic, because they want them to act right and basically just go to work in their shitty conditions. And we talked about the Men Who Built America, the horrible conditions that they had people working under, and they didn't want them to strike, and they wanted them to stay in their place. So what they started doing was they started criminalizing this activity. And this is white people too, you guys. Like Jim Crow did it to black people. This is white people that they were doing it. So when we're talking about things like, issues about defunding the police, the reason why this is very, very important to understand is because if you think it doesn't affect you, it fucking affects you, dude. All of this comes from somewhere, and we just need to be very careful when we're reviewing this. And so what they wanted is they wanted their private interests to be protected. And so they went about using the state money as a public department, as the police, to actually start helping control their employees. And so they wanted a stable and orderly workforce, and they wanted an orderly environment. And so anytime that they had any issues, they would call in the police to protect the collective good. And then what they did, in essence, is these very rich men put off the cost of actually trying to control their workers onto the state. And so what we see is we start seeing that they're looking for a safe and tranquil community within those plants. But of course, that's not happening. And the conditions are very dangerous, especially in the steel mill. Carnegie, I think at one point we talked about 1 in every 100 person in every one of his steel mills died over a 2 or 3 year period as things just got worse and worse. And you can go back and listen to that 4-part series, still one of my favorite series that we've done. And we start to see the inequality start to spread between the people who have control over the police department and the people who don't. And they wanted to make sure that their employees did not strike. So they would get in bed with the politicians and they would have a political strategy that basically exploited the workers. And anytime the workers got ready to, they were going to do something where like they were striking, they would say that they would refer to the strike as a riot. Okay. And so what would happen is that would take it out of a, hey, you're fucking us as employees and we demand different treatment, into now you're being a criminal and you're considered rioting. Okay. And so of course, the police department was legally authorized to use whatever force is necessary. And in one of the episodes of Men Who Built America, which I can't remember off the top of my head right now, we talked about how it was when I think it was Falk, came in and he was taking care of Carnegie Steel, why Andrew Carnegie was over in New Zealand for fucking 2 or 3 years. And he brought in this police militia, and there was a whole bunch of basic laborers who were striking because they were tired of dying. And they had rocks, and the militia comes in and they have guns, and they ended up killing 19 workers or something like that. Basically, they opened fire on unarmed men and they killed them. And this is what we're kind of talking about. So as a result of that, they started having people in the public that they deemed a dangerous class. And those dangerous classes of people were considered drunks, crimes, people who did crimes, hooligans, political protesters, and workers who rioted. And they deemed this dangerous class, again, white and black people, guys, they deemed this dangerous class to be biologically inferior, morally inept, intemperate, but intemperate, actually, I don't know the difference between that. What is intemperate, Zoe?
I don't know.
Okay. Hey, Stormy, look that up for me real quick. And unskilled and uneducated and basically underclass. And the thing that was so funny is that a lot of times what would happen is if they felt that they're... Go ahead.
Intemperate is having or showing a lack of self-control.
Oh,
okay.
I should have known that.
So they were considered morally intemperate. Thank you, Stormy. And what would happen is that they would get picked up a lot for drunkenness, as we talked about. But the deal is that they actually didn't have, drunkenness never existed until all of these magnates and all of these factories opened. And then they actually opened venues to actually get people drunk. And then all of a sudden we had basically the birth of being drunkenness. And so when we're talking about these dangerous class of people, we're talking about underclass people who were typically poor, foreign immigrants, and free black people, previously freed slaves. And what we saw is a shift in the police department to focus on the dangerous class, and that they were trying to, that their shift became to control bad people, individuals, rather than trying to overall, just kind of be a steward of social and economic conditions. And then, of course, the police department at that time was considered corrupt, which was very corrupt, and they were controlled by the local politicians. And the police force actually participated in vote buying on behalf of the local politicians in the area. So they would go out and they would try to either intimidate people, or B, they would try to buy the vote for these local politicians to keep these politicians in check, as they're keeping as they're designed to keep the employees in these factories from striking and starting to unionize. So in New York City around that time, we had 5,090 strikes involving almost 1 million workers from 1880 to 1900. Chicago had 1,737 strikes involving over 500,000 workers in the same period. And the riots that the local politicians kept saying, oh, they're rioting, were actually just strikes. And they were normally against a specific company in particular. And so, again, what we see, sorry, as we see that the public sector is becoming a private sector to basically use them at their disposal. And what they did was they set up alarm boxes throughout the city that had a key. And they only gave the key to people that they viewed as being businessmen or being respectable people. And these people had keys to this alarm box, and they could run to the alarm box at any time, day or night, and open the alarm box and ring the alarm and get the police to them instantaneously. And which, you know, you think that's kind of like 911, except the difference is everyone can call 911. But back then, if you didn't have a key, you couldn't even fucking call the police. That just blew my mind. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. And so their whole design at that time was they were to disperse brutality, to break up strikes, and they also went out preemptively. If there was if they knew that a strike was forming, what they would do is the police force would head out and they would, you know, hit a certain factory or the people there, and they would pick them up on really bullshit charges like Jim Crow, and they called it the Tramp Act. And so that, I guess, the Tramp Acts were kind of like the white version of the Jim Crow laws. But basically what they would do is they would preemptively gather up all these people, throw them in jail so that nobody could actually strike. And so at the time, the police started off, they were unarmed and ununiformed, and they also did not carry firearms. They did not want to wear uniforms because they were afraid that to the mafia and the mobs that it would make them too noticeable and that they might be obviously, you know, harmed in some way. And originally, again, they weren't armed. They just had billy clubs, and some billy clubs are longer as in nature. And what ended up happening is that the police themselves actually started carrying their own firearms. And so there were so many police carrying their own firearms that they said, okay, we're just going to have a standard issue where everybody has firearms. And again, the police at that time, the armed police, was designed to continue the separation between the 1% and the 99%. And this is poor whites. This is poor blacks. This is literally a class system. This has nothing to do with race specifically at that time. Politicians and the mob were in hand to hand, and they had these white youth gangs who would go out and they would patrol the streets intimidating voters. And remember, at this time, the only people who were voting were white males. So they would go out and they would intimidate voters to not vote against the local politicians. And so basically the police force was just kind of dispersed at the politician's whim to do his bidding. And at this time, there was and this will come up later in the series, the police department also did a couple things. They sheltered the homeless. They also were needed to journal infectious epidemics, which I thought was crazy. And then, of course, when Prohibition hit, their whole point was to make sure that people weren't drinking alcohol from 1919 to 1933, which we knew was a bunch of bullshit, and they turned a blind eye to the speakeasies. And so the police department at this time in the early 1900s lost all credibility, and President Hoover comes in 1929, and he's like, okay, guys, we got to fix this shit. So he starts to try to streamline and fix the corruption within the police department systems. And so in 1950, we see an overhaul in the police system where there is a focus on police professionalism. They tighten up the supervision, so they start actually monitoring the police and the cops that are going out there. They take them off horseback, except in the event of riot control, and they put them in motorized vehicles. They start taking the precinct houses out of the local neighborhoods, and they start centralizing them in one area, which has been one of the things in defunding the police. When they're talking about moving some of the budgetary funds, they're saying, hey, you know, you have people that are policing neighborhoods that aren't in the neighborhoods, and they don't understand the neighborhoods. And this all came out of what Hoover started in 29, but in 1950. So the precinct houses start getting centralized, the tightened chain of command comes in, and police start being subject to disciplinary action. But on top of that, what we start seeing is in all government is bureaucracies start forming. And we have a whole bunch of bureaucratic BS that starts developing. And in 1960, which is so ironic, we start seeing the first steps for the police to unionize, which in their past life, their whole purpose was to not let anybody else unionize. And now they start unionizing because they wanted, they didn't want that much of a heavy bureaucracy, and they wanted to be able to participate in the discussions and the procedures and the practices. So then they start leaning toward unionization. And so getting off subject for one second, the reason why this is a big deal, and we talked a lot about this a little bit in the episode on nonprofits, labor unions are considered 501c, I think it's 501c5. And basically what it says is the government says, hey, the money that you give to in your union dues, that is already taxed. And so therefore, whatever they decide to do with that money, we're not going to tax them again because that's double taxation. And so what you have is you have one of the things with the true nonprofits, the 501c3s, we talked about the churches. One of the things that keeps them a nonprofit is that they cannot back a political figure, even though we see specifically with the evangelicals backing certain candidates. Technically, you're not supposed to do that. That's what makes you a 501c3. The unions are 501c, like I said, I think they're 501c5s. And what we've seen is as these unions have come up, that starting from that time, 1960s, 70s, when this started getting implemented, we start seeing a whole bunch of this financial stuff going where it's backing a certain candidate. And what candidate in their right mind wants to be perceived as weak on crime? And we talked about this in, I can't remember what episode it was where we talked about the show 13, where we talked about when Bill Clinton basically did the, mandatory minimum sentences. He didn't want to be perceived as being tough on crime. When was
show
that?
32.
Shut up. Yeah, I know it's not show 32. This is episode like 200 something, Stormy. Do you understand that? That's what we're on right now. You knob. And so anyway, what happened is that, so we're starting to see these, or we have been seeing for many, many years that, candidates vying for this unionized police dollars to be able to put it on their commercials, to be able to get access to some of that union dollars, which is not considered double taxed, but corporations are double taxed. So I just thought that was very interesting. And I still really don't like unions, me personally, backing a candidate. I you know what, fucking pay it or shut the fuck up. I can't, it drives me crazy. Don't fuck with money like that, but whatever. And so what we have is, as we have
Mel, and it's a 501c5
it
for labor organization. So
thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, because I thought that was it, but I'm like scanning through my notes and I can't find it. So thank you for that. So
It's a 501c5.
That's amazing, Stormy. Thank you for.
Thanks, Storm, because I wasn't sure if I could read, but
Yeah, I just wanted to,
yeah, double check.
I just wanted to.
When Zoe said it, I got confused a little bit, but then when you came in, Stormy, it was like, oh my God, I totally get it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So as we start seeing unions coming into the police force, basically this is the backdrop. We've already done an episode on the decade of the 1970s and the shit show economically and financially that the state of the economy was in. So we have a bad economic recessions going on. What we're starting to see is white people leaving the big cities and heading to the suburbs, and the ones who can afford it, the professional people, and then that's leaving more of your immigrants. And we've already talked about the discrimination, the economics of discrimination, and why a lot of the people, non-whites, were stuck basically in the cities, because all of this stuff is going in tandem all at the same time. That's why it's important to understand the history of stuff, because when you look at it all in that context, you're like, oh, okay, I understand it a little bit better now. And so what you had is cities that were fiscally mismanaging money, which is not a fucking shock. And what the politicians did was they blamed it on the police force. And they said, it's not us. It's the police force, because the police force was trying to unionize, which was the same fucking thing that the employees were trying to do when they worked in the factories. And so the politicians who used to have the police department in their back pocket said, oh, no, it's their fault. They're the reason. So we're going to reform them. So then we see another reform come through the police departments. We see a downsize from 2-person car patrol to a 1-person driving. We see that they start breaking out into highly specialized task centers, which is one of the things that we're going to touch on when we get to the pros and cons of defunding the police. That's one of the things that the moderate people want, is they want to have some of the duties removed from the police department, and they want to bring in, mental health workers and things like that, because there's statistics in here we'll get to of how much mental health people that cops have to come in contact with, and quite frankly, they're not trained for that. They became reactive and still proactive, and they started incorporating technology. We see 911 come on the scene, and we start seeing that the police are, again, still isolated from the communities. We start seeing the use of lie detectors. And then, of course, again, all this backdrop is against all of the protests between the 60s and the 70s with the Vietnam War and the Korean War and the hippie movement and all of this stuff. And so in 1968, we see the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act come through, where a whole bunch of federal money got dumped into basically trying to overhaul the image of the police departments, and they tried to focus on community policies. They started trying to decentralize the precincts again. And this I thought was wonderful. And I'm going to put all the resources on here. So if you don't like something I'm saying, well, fucking go read it. I mean, I don't know what you're going to tell you, bro. But that literally to overcome scholarly literature that showed that police virtually had no impact on crime. And that was very interesting, but I didn't get into it, but I just thought it would be something that was worth noting. And then basically they were trying to say that the police was not controlled by the politicians. And so what we've seen is since the 1960s, and this is going to kind of bring this into present day, we're going to talk a little bit about how much the financial aspect takes up of some of these actual budgets. And then we're going to save this until we're going to pick this conversation up in part 2. So since 1960, we're seeing that larger and larger portions of city and state budgets have become going to law enforcement. And of course, this is rooted in what LBJ started, when he started prioritizing crime control and the war on crime came about. And then we see that the police unions have come in and that they're almost, cart before the horse, because before they were actually being ran by the politicians. Now we see the police unions are so strong, they can actually back different politicians if they don't like them or do like them. And so anytime you talk about, if you're a politician and you're looking at a police department budget and you say you want to cut that budget, well, who the fuck wants to vote for that? Just like the saying defunding the police. I don't want to fucking defund the police. That sounds awful. You mean somebody's going to break in my house and I can't call the cops? Horrible fucking word choices. And so a politician can't say, hey, we need to cut back on the budgets of the police departments. So in Los Angeles in 2020, the LAPD budget constituted 18% of the city's total budget. So 1.86 billion out of 10.5 billion, and about 54% of the city's general fund, which is paid by tax revenues, but is not is generalized and not specific to a certain purpose. In Chicago for 2020, the Chicago Police Department constituted 18% of the city's budget, 40% of the city's general, and 40% of the city's general fund. So we're talking fucking a fuck ton of money, you guys. And New York City in 2020, the New York PD budget constituted 6% of the city's budget, so 5.9 billion out of 97 billion. And that was the third largest budget after the Department of Education and Social Services. And 85% of that money went to salaries and wages. And so for business owners, that's usually your biggest cost center is the salaries and wages of your employees. In Oakland in 2018, about 41% of the general fund went to the Oakland Police Department. In Minneapolis, the Police and Corrections Department grew 41% between 2009 and 2019 as far as their budget goes. And in 2020, Californians, there was a proposal to increase the Los Angeles Police Department budget, and basically they said no. And so the mayor agreed to try to slash 100 million to 150 million from the proposed funding. And so in a lot of the cities, what we're seeing is that the police budgets are larger than public safety departments, and they are taking up more and more and taking away, in essence, I don't want to say what's shifting money away from some services like mental health, like homelessness, things like that. And the argument seems to be so far, if you're not a crazy fucking leftist nut job, is that defunding the police means take a look at their budget and remove some of the things that they're not equipped to handle. So for instance, dealing with the homelessness. And then there was a study that showed that currently that 21% of a police officer's time is spent responding to or transporting people with mental illness. And 1 in 4 people who are killed by the police have severe mental issues. And so what they're saying is, part of this, and we'll get into this in the next segment later, is that they would like to have not as many police officers and use them when they're needed, but they want to actually have more social workers and emergency technicians and conflict resolution people to kind of be kind of arm in arm on the police department to help maybe de-escalate a lot of the things that we're seeing these protests that are coming out of the like the Floyds and the Breonna Taylors and those types of things that are actually kicking off the whole defunding the police. And there is a city that has actually defunded the police probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it's very interesting. They had a lot of pros and cons that came out of it, and they did something similar, but we'll get into that during the second part of the podcast. And so from my research that I've done now, again, depending on if you're left, right, or in the middle, if you're in the middle, look at the budget, bring in people that are more skilled, stop putting so much on these officers that they're wound so fucking tight, try to put them back in the communities. If you're a leftist, kumbaya, and if you're rightist, everybody's going to take your guns. So that's the short, quick history of the police department. And then we're going to continue to move through the actual defunding the police and dive more into the finances of it.
That was very, very interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
I didn't know, I mean, obviously I'm not from these parts, but I didn't know anything about the history of your great police force. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know what the correct phrase for defunding the police would be. Like, if you could use a catchphrase that didn't say defunding the police, that would make people more open-minded.
Remodel,
yeah.
Yeah.
Or reorg.
or update. You can like
Yeah.
a 21st century police force. We've learned a lot, and here's what a 21st century police force looks like.
Yeah.
Versus we have 100% police officers, or let's say if it's 80% police officers, 20% administrative. A 21st century police force looks like 60% officers, 10% social work, a 5% psychiatrist, and then your administrative staffs.
Yeah.
Because we can apply, we have enough data where we can apply science, we can apply data, get some data scientists on there. And if we know, you just shared that 21% of the people that the police are dealing with are
20% of the time.
Or what's that, 20% of the time?
Yep.
They're dealing with people with mental health issues,
Right.
which they're not trained for. That's not what they don't want to do that either. Let's
Right.
get someone who is trained for it, someone who's passionate about it, because that's what they went to school for. They got their education. That creates a whole nother element to where you have the mental health tax, people. They're not giving tickets. Police, the officers are, but now we don't have to, maybe we potentially don't have to have 30 officers show up to the scene.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Hey, let's have 2 or 3 officers show up, and let's have the mental health expert there and the officers there for backup, because they can de-escalate. Yeah.
And what I found fascinating,
21st century police, what it looks like.
yeah, something other than the words defund the police.
Yeah, horrible branding.
Yeah, that's horrible branding. But the thing that I found the most interesting is because the nonprofit, I've mentioned this many times in this podcast, the nonprofit series that Zoe and I did has stuck with me so much because of I don't want to say inaccuracies, but I can't think of the other word, that you can't have your cake and eat it too. And we saw this with a lot of the churches. They don't have to disclose their budget, so they don't. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, and I go to church. And when we're looking at these police unions, where, like, for me, with the licenses I have, if I donate to a political contribution of any kind, I have to disclose that. So I have to disclose how much I did and who I gave it to see if there's any type of conflict of interest politically or anything like that. It's very regulated. And it blows my mind how the police departments pay in money into the unions, and then the unions can turn around and go, okay, we're enjoying some tax rules that are beneficial to us, and we're going to still be able to contribute money, and we're going to sponsor or back a certain political candidate, which might not have anything to fucking do with anything besides the fact that they're going to keep your financial machine running their way. So when we're talking about the police department of the past being controlled by the politicians, how the fuck is it any different just because the positions are switched now? And it bothers me so much that that is allowed to happen, and how it's a one-way street. It's like, oh, the politicians were controlling police officers, but the police officers union doesn't control the politicians. Like, having a sponsored, any Joe Schmo, like, backed by the such and such police department, you're like, okay, that's good, because we like police, right? I mean, it just fucking bothers me how there is certain organizations that enjoy different tax regulations that can then turn around and fucking contribute to political policy while they enjoy the fucking tax benefits that we don't. It fucking pisses me off.
Tell me how you really feel.
I'm sorry, but I mean, do you see what I'm saying though? Or am I just...
No, I get it. Absolutely.
I thought it was also interesting how historically peaceful protesters were categorized. They tried to criminalize them,
mm-hmm.
and how not much has changed. You know what I mean in that regard,
mm-hmm.
by certain people.
And I thought that was interesting too, because when they said that, I was like, oh, you mean they're striking for their rights, but they're calling them rioters. And like, if you see the TV and you see people picking up bricks and breaking windows and destroying businesses, you're a fucking rioter. Okay. I think that's pretty black and white. But if you're a group of protesters going down the street, that, and people were rioting in the streets. Well, it's on the words you use, right? No, they were protesting, which is their law to do so. And did you guys see, we touched on this in another podcast episode, which I can't remember because we're on over 200 episodes now, Stormy. That couple that was brandishing weapons got indicted.
Yeah.
But the governor said he's going to, if anything happens, he's going to pardon them. The governor's already come out and said that. Yeah.
Did that have anything to do with the fact that they're two white attorneys by any chance? And they stood there, pointing guns at people in the middle of the street. And that's okay. That's their right to do so. That's just them protesting, is it?
And I've talked about on this podcast, I have a CCW. You cannot fucking brandish a weapon. Okay. I don't know the rules, at least the rules in Nevada. I don't know the fucking rules in the state that they were in, but the people weren't, maybe they were coming on their property, because if you have a large group of people that's walking down a road, maybe they're kind of overflowing into your yard a little bit. But the thing is that if you're standing out there with a fucking gun, you are brandishing a fucking weapon. And if you brandish a weapon with a CCW in the state of Nevada, that is grounds to remove your fucking CCW. So when I saw that, I'm like, I'm assuming since you're attorneys, you have CCWs, which even though they weren't concealed, and again, maybe it was an open carry state, and Nevada's an open carry state too. But I mean, I looked at that and I was like, how is that not considered brandishing regardless? And I was actually shocked that they were indicted, but now it makes more sense if the governor said he's probably going to pardon them. But you are correct, Zoe. It's that whole rioter, protesting kind of thing. And I wish, I mean, I don't wish, because then I'd be much older, but in the 60s when everybody was protesting, I wonder if they called them rioters too. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sure
they did. Oh yeah, those long-haired hippies. Of
course.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Put them all up.
So this is going to prove to be a very interesting series, and we're going to get a little bit more into, like I said, the finances of the whole defunding the police movement, or we're going to start calling it updating the police movement, and how it affects, and hopefully I'm going to be able to get some really good data. Now the thing is that in the end, none of us on this podcast are professionals in this. We don't know this every fucking statistic, and we're not criminologists, and we don't know if reorganizing the police department in any way, shape, or form is going to help, but we hope to at least give you goods, pros and cons, and I will give you all the links so you can make the decision for yourself. And like I did last time, I went in an incognito window with Google and I searched a topic and I got boom, 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 boom. And I started opening tabs and reading. And then when I saw something that was interesting, I would go back to another article, and all of those are going to be listed for you so you guys can weigh in or read it or just hate me. I don't really fucking give a shit, quite frankly. Anything to say before we roll out, y'all?
I hate you.
Aw,
Why?
that's so sweet. Like, do you see my little heart? You can't see it, but I'm actually blushing. Because Stormy said he hates me, but the way he said it was totally with love.
Yeah, it's like he's pulling your hair.
I know. Yeah, or pushing me down on the
Playground.
Oh, real quick to put this on a happy note. Did you guys do this in Britain? Stormy, I don't know, you might be too old for this, but little boys and girls on the playground, the boys would put their shirt above their, maybe this was just a Southern thing. Now I'm thinking about it, I'm going to embarrass my people. The boys would put their shirt over their head, so like they'd still have their arms in it, but their chest would be out, and the girls would take their shirt and they would do like this, like make it like a bikini top. You know what I mean? And then they chase each other on the playground. Did we only do that in the South, or was that everywhere?
Yeah, I think, you know.
Don't remember doing that. No, sorry.
Did you guys
I did go to an all-girls school, so that would have been weird.
I've never done that with my cousins.
Yeah. Well, I don't have cousins. Remember, I'm an only child. Well, actually, no, I can say no. I guess it has nothing to do with it. Yes, I do have cousins, but no, my cousins and I didn't do that either. But did you do that, Stormy? Seriously?
I mean, I remember putting my head over my shirt. I remember girls tying their shirts like that, but I don't remember that once you did that, you start chasing each other.
Oh yeah,
that part of the game.
Mel thing, I think.
I'm just happy it's not just only a Southern thing, because as I was starting to tell the story, I got really fucking embarrassed. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh my God, my people. So, okay, we're going to close this out. So we will catch you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Bye. We'll see you.
Thank you for listening. Please check back for upcoming episodes and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Finances, the Other F Word.